My name is Jim Kwik of Kwik Learning, and I help people to learn quickly. Many people think of me as a personal trainer for your brain. When you go to a personal trainer for your body, what do? They make your muscles stronger. They help you build energy. They help you to become more flexible, more pliable, greater levels of endurance. And I want your mental muscles to be those things. I want your memory to be stronger. I want your focus to be sharper. I want you to have more mental energy and capabilities, flexible thinking, pliable problem solving. And so my goal is to help people to upgrade the most important supercomputer on the planet, which is the human brain. We upgrade our phones, we upgrade our apps, you upgrade your computers. When's the last time you took some time to upgrade the power of your own mind? I believe we live in the millennium of the mind, where it's not like it was 100 years ago, where your value was more brute strength. Today, it's brain strength. It's not our muscle power. Today, it has to do with our mind power. And the faster and more you can learn, the faster and more you can earn. Because knowledge today is not only power, today knowledge is profit. And I don't mean just financial profit, that's obvious, but I mean all the areas of your life, your health, your relationships, your career, your education. Everything gets enhanced when you have the ability to tap into more of your brain's potential. Now, when people see my work, maybe they're in an audience or they watch my videos. Often I'll do these demonstrations where maybe I will memorize 100 people's names in an audience as I pass around a microphone. Or maybe an audience will challenge me with memorizing 100 random words or a 100-digit number. And I do it forwards and then backwards. But I always tell people afterwards, I don't do this to impress you. I do this to express to you what's possible. Because the truth is, each and every one of you can do this too, regardless of your age, your background, your career, your education level, your financial situation, your gender, your history, your IQ. And the reason why I know it's possible is because when I was 5 years old, I had a traumatic brain injury. I was in kindergarten class. I took a very bad fall headfirst into an iron grate radiator. I was rushed to the emergency room, and my parents said I was never really the same. Whereas before I was very energized, very playful, very curious, I became very shut down. And where it really showed up was in school. I had a very poor memory. I had trouble focusing all the time. It took me 3 years longer than everybody else just to learn how to read. When I was 9 years old, I remember I was in class and I was being teased because I was slowing down the lessons because the teacher had to repeat herself over and over again, and I would pretend to understand, but I didn't really understand. But one day, the teacher came to my defense because I was being teased and pointed to me, and all I remember her saying was, "That's the boy with the broken brain." And that label became my limit. And so I struggled all through school, and I became painfully shy because I never knew the answers. Whenever a teacher would call on me, I would get so nervous and I never knew the correct response. I would freeze up during exams. I would do a book report because I worked really hard. But if a teacher asked me to present it in front of the classroom, I would lie and I would say I didn't do it because I was so nervous and terrified of presenting and having the focus on me. So I remember that the class would empty and I would be the only one there. And on the way out, I would take my book report out of my book bag and I would throw it in the trash. I was so filled with self-doubt, felt like I was not enough, and I felt like I was broken. And so those words became my internal conversation. Every single time I did badly on a quiz, on an exam, which was all the time, I would always say, oh, because I have the broken brain. When I wasn't picked for sports, I have the broken brain. And that became my affirmation. And I have to be very careful because when you have these inner conversations inside of yourself, people come to me all the time and they say, Jim, I'm too old, or Jim, I'm not smart enough, or, Jim, I have a horrible memory. I always say, stop. If you fight for your limitations, you get to keep them. If you fight for your limits, they are yours. And so your mind is always eavesdropping on your self-talk. When I was 18 years old, I was lucky to get into a local university, and I thought being a freshman meant I could make a fresh start. I wanted to show the world, I wanted to show myself that I could do it. I wanted to make my parents proud. And actually, I did a lot worse because it was so much more difficult. So much in university is more spent outside of classrooms without the help of teachers and professors, and it was on your own. And I didn't really have the capabilities, the knowledge, skills to be able to succeed. And so I was ready to quit school because I didn't have the money to go to college in the first place, and I didn't want to waste it. And a friend of mine said, why don't you get some perspective before you tell your family that you're going to quit school? Why don't you come home with me? I'm going home for the weekend and get, just kind of a different point of view. And I agreed to go, and the family is pretty well off, and the father's walking me around his property on the water and asks me a very innocent question. He says, Jim, how's school? And this is the worst question you could ask me at this time. So I break down in front of this complete stranger, and I start bawling and telling him my entire story and how I have a broken brain and I can never succeed, and I'm ready to quit school, and I'm going to be such a disappointment. And he says, stop, Jim. He says, why are you in school? What do you want to be? What do you want to do? What do you want to have? What do you want to create? What do you want to share? And honestly, I didn't have an answer for any of that. I just thought going to school is what everybody did, but I didn't have a reason. And he probed more, and then when I go to answer him, he puts his hand up and says, stop. And he reaches into his back pocket, takes out a journal, and tears out a couple of sheets, and he asks me to write down my answers. What do I want to be, do, have, share, create? And I start doing it. And it was, in the beginning, very difficult because I never asked those questions of myself before. And as I started to imagine and dream, I started to write down my answers. And after, I don't know how much time goes by, but I have a couple of pages full. And I start folding up the sheets of paper to put in my pocket, and he reaches out and he grabs them. And I'm terrified because I didn't know that he would be reading my answers. These were things I've never shared with anybody else, and things that I never really honored or really recognized or acknowledged in myself. And he's reading them and minutes go by, and he looks up at me and he says, Jim, you are this close to everything on your list. And he spreads his index fingers maybe a foot apart. And I'm thinking, there's no way. This person is crazy. Has he not been listening to everything I just said? And it's amazing because when I was having those thoughts, he takes his index fingers and he puts them right to the temples of my head, meaning what was in between my brain was the master key to getting everything I wanted, everything that was on my bucket list. And he takes me into a room of his home that I've never seen before. It is ceiling to floor, wall to wall, covered in books. Now, remember, I am not a great reader at this time. In fact, I've never read a book cover to cover. And being in that room is like being in a room full of snakes, for people who are afraid of snakes. But what makes it worse is he starts going to the shelves and grabbing snakes and handing them to me. And I start looking at the titles of these books, and they are these biographies of some incredible men and women throughout history, and some very early personal growth books. Norman Vincent Peale, The Power of Positive Thinking, Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich, Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And he says, Jim, leaders are readers. I want you to commit to reading one book a week. And automatically, my self-talk says, there's just no way. And I tell him, I can't do that. I start fighting for my limitations again. I said, I have midterms. I have all this schoolwork. And he says, Jim, do not let school get in the way of your education. And this was 3 decades ago. I didn't realize it was a Mark Twain quote, but I honored it. I was like, that's very insightful. And yet I cannot commit to reading all these books. And very smart man, he reaches into his pocket, and what does he pull out? My dream list, my bucket list. And he has the audacity to read every single one of my dreams out loud into the universe. And something shook in my mind and in my spirit, something fierce. Hearing your dreams, your aspirations, your goals, and another person's voice incanted out into the universe, it really messed with my mind and my soul, something fierce. And honestly, a lot of those things on that list were things I wanted to do for my parents, things that they could never afford, or even if they had the capabilities, would not do for themselves. So with that purpose and that motivation, that leverage, if you will, I agree to read one book a week on top of everything else. So fast forward, I'm back at school and I'm sitting at my desk and I have a pile of books that I have to read for school and a pile of books I promised to read. Now, I already couldn't get through pile A, so where was I going to get the time? Well, I don't eat, I don't sleep, I don't spend time with friends, I don't exercise, I just live in the library for weeks. And one evening, I pass out of sheer exhaustion. I fall down a flight of stairs in the library, I hit my head again, and I woke up 2 days later in the hospital. And at this point, it's the darkest time in my life. I felt like I died, and maybe part of me thought or maybe wished that I did, because I felt like I was such a burden. I felt like I wasn't enough. I felt like I didn't have anything of value or contribution. And I thought there had to be a better way. And when I had that thought, the nurse came in with a mug of tea. And on that mug was a genius. It was Albert Einstein. And there was a quote that spoke to me, and it said, "The same level of thinking that has created your problem won't solve your problem. The same level of thinking that has created your problem won't solve your problem." And it made me ask a brand new question: what's my real problem? And my brain said, well, I'm a very slow learner. I have a broken brain. And I said, well, how do I think differently about it? Well, maybe I could learn how to learn faster. Maybe I could learn how to learn better. Maybe I could fix my brain. And I thought, well, where do people go to find out how to do that? And I thought, school. So I asked the nurse to bring me a course bulletin, and I started looking at all the classes for next semester. And I noticed that all of these classes, every time I turned the page, they were just filled with classes on what to learn: math, history, science, Spanish. But there were 0 classes on how to learn those things. There wasn't a class on focus or concentration. Where was the class on speed reading? Or where was the class on critical thinking? Where was the class on problem solving or exponential thinking? Where was the class on creativity? Where was the class on active listening? Where was the class on memory? I always thought it should have been the 4th R in school, right? They teach you reading, writing, arithmetic. Obviously, spelling was not one of those things. But what about recall? What about retention? Socrates said, learning is remembering. And so I set my courses aside, all my studies aside, because I wasn't making traction there. And I start really pouring myself into these personal growth books. And once I started to do that, my mindset and my motivation even started to shift. I started to believe in myself a little bit more. I started seeing possibility. I started to explore different areas of study, like speed reading, like ancient mnemonics. I wanted to know that I had this real deep curiosity. What did people do before there were printing presses and computers? How did people learn information or retain it or pass on history to the next generation around campfires? And I discovered these tools, ancient wisdom, and I started studying also brain science, adult learning theory, multiple intelligence theory. And I started to make it very practical and start implementing little things every single day. And I believe little by little, a little becomes a lot, because consistency compounds. That inch by inch, it's a cinch, but yard by yard, it's way too hard. So I started taking these little steps that I teach, and in about 30 to 60 days, a light switch just flipped on, and I started to understand things in class for the very first time. I started to have this laser-like focus. I started to be able to read faster and not only study better, but really understand the information. I started to remember things. It wasn't even at the tip of my tongue. I could pull it out. It was on my mental fingertips. And so with that, my grades improved dramatically. My confidence got an upgrade. I started to expand and make new friends and just find more joy because I started to believe in myself at a deeper level. And also, I started to get a little bit upset, maybe even a lot upset, because there were these simple ideas, knowledge, skills, abilities, tools that I could have learned, and I didn't have to suffer and struggle for all of those years. So I dedicated myself to helping other people to be able to have the same breakthroughs. I believe that our brain is the ultimate superpower, and we're only tapping a very small percent of its potential. We use all our brain, but not everybody uses their brain the same way. Much like someone's body, everybody uses 100% of their body, but some people are just more skilled and more fit and more healthy. I found my mission in life because I started to teach and I started to tutor, and I wanted to help everybody not go through the same struggles and challenges that I did. And one of my very first students, she was a freshman in college. She read 30 books in 30 days, not skim or scanned. She really read them, understood them. And I wanted to find out not how she did it. I know exactly how she did it because I taught her. I wanted to know why. I'm deeply interested in people's motivation and their purpose. And I found out that her mother was dying of terminal cancer and was only given 2 months to live. And the books she was reading were books to save her mom's life. And I wished her luck, prayers. 6 months goes by, I don't hear from her. And then one day I get a phone call and she's crying and crying hysterically. And when she stops, I find out they're tears of joy that her mother not only survived, but her mother's really thriving. Doctors don't know how, they don't know why. The doctors were calling it a miracle, but her mother attributed 100% to the great advice she got from her daughter, who learned it from all these books. And in that moment, I realized that if knowledge is power, then learning is our superpower. And it's a superpower we all have. We just aren't shown how to access it. What if you were born with the most incredible superpower on the planet, but you weren't told and you weren't shown how to use it? All creatures in nature have superpowers. Some could fly, some could breathe underwater. Some creatures are really super fast, some are super strong. Now, human beings, we don't have that naturally. We're not super fast or super strong or fly or breathe underwater, climb and things. We can't do those things. But with the power of our mind, we can fly. With the power of our mind, we can breathe underwater. With the power of our mind, we can go super fast. And so we are the ultimate creators, that our minds are the ultimate adaptation machines. And we just need guidance because your brain doesn't come with an owner's manual and your brain is not user-friendly. So I've dedicated the past 3 decades of my life to show people how to access their brightest, best brain. And our mission really is no brain left behind.